My name is Hector Ayala. For over 30 years, I have traveled the endless highways of Mexico and the United States, carrying my load and my story. With every kilometer traveled, I have faced storms, bad roads, and worse. I have endured the heat of the desert and the cutting cold of the snowy forest. I believed I had seen it all, until that night in the Sierra de Puebla, on a stretch of road leading to COXCATLAN. With my experience, I knew that the road held secrets, but I never imagined that destiny would lead me to face an incarnate nightmare. The thickness of the forest seemed to come to life with every kilometer, and my mind, accustomed to dodging potholes and facing adversity, shuddered at the inexplicable. For a moment, the weight of my years on the road became an unbearable burden. I had always considered the road my companion, my refuge. But that night on a forgotten stretch, it transformed into a labyrinth of terrors. A dark force, rising from the depths of the earth itself, seemed to call to me, inviting me to venture further into the unknown. And there, at that crossroads between experience and the abyss, I understood that nothing I had lived through compared to the horror that awaited me. The road, with its desolation, promised to reveal secrets that perhaps were better left undiscovered. I remember that the road was empty, as always, especially on that stretch before reaching a nearby town whose name I can't recall. Kilometers and kilometers of asphalt stretched ahead until the pavement broke into a rough, potholed gap that forced me to slow down. My truck's headlights were the only source of light. The radio was tuned to a regional music station, but the signal suddenly began to fail, filling the cabin with an irritating static. Annoyed, I turned it off, leaving only the roar of the engine and the wind hitting the windows. It was a cold night, one of those that chills you to the bone. Yet, despite the hours of driving, I didn't feel sleepy. Something in the air kept me alert, as if the road itself was watching me. And then, I saw it. At first, I thought it was an animal, a deer maybe, or a coyote, just like the many I had seen along the road, dead and covered in mud on the pavement. But as I got closer, the shape became clearer. It wasn't an animal, it was a person. I slammed on the brakes. The truck screeched across the asphalt, kicking up dust and smoke as it came to a stop just a few feet from the body. My heart pounded and my hands trembled as I gripped the wheel. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. It had to be an accident. Someone had hit them and left them there. It wasn't unusual. It happened all the time. And with sadness, I must admit that I, too, had encountered lonely night wanderers on the road, and sometimes I couldn't stop in time. When you're hauling that much weight, braking suddenly is impossible, so you just keep going, and you try not to think about it. After stopping next to the body, I got out of the truck, feeling the icy wind bite my face. The corpse lay face down in the middle of the lane. It was a woman, or at least that's what it looked like. She was wearing a white cotton dress, now stained with dirt and something darker, clotted blood. I approached slowly, calling out to her, though I knew she wouldn't answer. And when I was close enough, I realized something was terribly wrong. She was completely dismembered. It was a horrifying sight. I had no idea who had done this to her. Her legs and arms were severed from her torso, arranged in a strange pattern, as if someone had tried to form a symbol with them. Her head lay to one side, partially covered by dark, matted hair. Trembling, I bent down and carefully moved the hair aside with a branch I found nearby. Her eyes were glassy, open, and her mouth was frozen in a grimace of terror. But the most terrifying thing wasn't her expression. It was what was written on her skin, in blood. A message. Or at least, that's what it seemed. Were they letters? Symbols? I wasn't sure. I stepped back, shaking, my stomach twisting with nausea. It's not that death scares me. It's the way she looked. I had seen crime scene photos before. Mysterious cases. Murders shared on social media. Things you scroll past and can't believe are real. Things you tell yourself will never happen to you. But now I was standing in front of one. My blood ran cold. My body tensed as I scanned my surroundings, convinced that someone was watching me. Had this been a trap? Had they been waiting for me? The road was empty, silent. There was no sign of another vehicle, no sign of anyone else. Just me, my truck, and that mutilated body. I rushed back to the cab and tried to call the police. No signal. The phone was dead. I cursed under my breath and decided to get out of there, fast. I started the engine, but just as I was about to drive away, something caught my attention. I hesitated. Then, against all reason, I stepped out of the truck again. Near the body, there was a trail of blood. It wasn't a puddle around the corpse. It was an irregular line leading into the trees, as if something had been dragged into the undergrowth, leaving a dark, oozing path on the earth. I froze, staring into the darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to get in the truck and leave, to forget what I had seen. But something else, something deeper, something darker, urged me forward. I can't explain it. It was as if fate itself, no, as if something was driving me to see more, to know more, to satiate. A strange curiosity settled deep in my gut. "What the hell are you doing, Hector?" I whispered under my breath, but my feet were already moving. I followed the trail of blood into the mountain, armed only with a flashlight and my Swiss Army knife. The forest was dense, and the weak beam of my flashlight barely illuminated a few meters ahead. The branches scratched my arms and face, and the damp ground felt unstable beneath my boots, as if it had rained recently. The trail of coagulated blood continued, each step heavier than the last, and colder. I felt it, the sensation of eyes on my back, someone watching. Every time I turned around, there was nothing but shadows. After what felt like an eternity, the trail ended in a clearing, and then I saw them. They were lights, small and flickering like fireflies. At least, that's what I thought at first. But then, a flash, a green light that didn't seem natural. Something floated in the air, forming a circle around an object I couldn't quite distinguish. I stepped closer, switching off my flashlight and allowing the eerie glow to guide me. My fear clawed at me, warning me to turn back. Every step was a battle against the primal instinct to flee. When I was close enough, I finally saw what the lights were illuminating. An altar. It was made of stacked, weathered stones with black candles burning atop it, candles whose flames flickered in an unnatural shade of blue. Scattered across the surface were bones, feathers, and something else. A heart. And it looked like it was still beating. Was it hers? The woman I found on the road? A nauseating stench filled my lungs, a mixture of rotting meat and something sickeningly sweet, like sandalwood incense. I inched closer, unable to look away. And then I saw it. A symbol carved into the ground right in front of the altar. It was large, intricate, drawn in dried blood, the same blood that had led me here. A pentagram encircled like something out of a satanic ritual. But there was something about it, something worse. The moment my eyes traced its form, a deep unease settled in my bones. I shouldn't be here. The candle flames flickered. Then, without warning, they went out. Total darkness swallowed me whole. My flashlight wouldn't turn back on. The silence was absolute. I couldn't even hear my own breathing. And then, movement. Something was there with me. Something large. Something unseen. The air thickened, suffocating, unbreathable. A murmur brushed against my ear, whispers in a language I didn't understand. It had the cadence of an indigenous dialect, yet it was unlike anything I had ever heard. Those words, they rattled me, shook something deep inside me. I wanted to run, but the trail that had led me here twisted into something unfamiliar, a dirt path that became narrower, more treacherous. The trees pressed in, their branches stretching toward me like skeletal fingers, ready to pull me into the abyss. The cold grew unbearable, each breath slicing through me like frozen blades. The flashlight flickered weakly. I smacked it with my palm, willing it to stay on. The dim light barely pierced the darkness ahead. I had to keep going. I wanted to turn back, but I didn't. Instead of heading back toward the highway, I followed another path, one that led deeper into the woods. I knew I shouldn't go any further. I knew I was getting closer to something I didn't want to see, but I couldn't stop. I don't know if it was the damned curiosity or something else, something pulling me forward, an invisible thread tied around my chest, dragging me into the unknown. The trail of blood was fresher now, and I could smell it, that thick, metallic scent mixed with the stench of damp earth and decay. My boots sank into the mud, each step more labored than the last. The silence of the forest was unnatural. No insects, no animals, no rustling leaves, only my footsteps, only my pounding heart. And then I emerged from the trees. The scene before me left me paralyzed. In the center of a ring of towering trees, a massive bonfire roared toward the starry sky. But its flames were not normal. They burned green and blue, twisting and writhing as if they were alive. And surrounding the fire, A group of women. They stood in a perfect circle, dressed in dirty, tattered huipilas. Their faces were smeared with mud, obscuring their features, except for their eyes. Their black, empty eyes. They stared into the flames, whispering in that same unrecognizable dialect. The words vibrated in the air, sending waves of dread through my body and making my skin crawl. In the center of the circle, one of the women stood apart. She was older, her long gray braid wrapped around her waist, and in her arms, a child. I tensed. He was no older than 5, no bigger than my own son, the son I abandoned years ago. The boy was naked, his pale skin glowing under the firelight. But he wasn't crying. He wasn't moving. He didn't react to the horror around him. He was in some kind of trance, his eyes shut as if he were asleep. The old woman raised him higher, lifting him toward the flames, and suddenly I moved. I didn't think. I just ran. "Stop!" I screamed. I had to save him. There were no more than 6 women, all of them short, frail, old. What could they possibly do to me? I was wrong. The moment I crossed the edge of the circle, an unseen force struck me, like a sledgehammer to the face and chest. I hit the ground, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. I gasped, but no breath came. I tried to get up, nothing. It was as if an invisible weight had slammed down on me, crushing me against the earth. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. The women paid no attention to me. They continued their ritual, their voices rising in a chilling crescendo. The old woman lifted the boy higher, and then he opened his eyes. He saw me, and in his gaze I saw it. Terror. A fear so deep, so raw, it made me want to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. And then she threw him into the fire. No hesitation, no mercy, no fear of God. Time seemed to slow. I watched, helpless as the child's small body tumbled into the flames, but the fire, it didn't consume him, it absorbed him. His screams, anguished, piercing, merged with the voices of the women, their chant reaching a fever pitch. And then the fire exploded. A blinding eruption of green and blue shot into the sky, twisting, warping, taking shape. A figure, a being. I know what I saw. I know I wasn't hallucinating. But that fire transformed into a creature, or I don't know what it was. I can't describe it with words, for it was too big, too unnatural. Its eyes burned with the same fire, and its mouth was a crooked slit that opened in the middle of the flames, forming a kind of silent scream. This thing seemed to be looking at me, and in that instant, I knew that I was in the presence of something evil. The weight of my body increased, and I felt something grinding inside me, as if this creature was exploring my mind or my soul. I don't know. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I wanted to close my eyes, but I couldn't look away. They were burning me. They were burning me as I stared. The next thing I saw was those women. They began to writhe, their bodies contorting in impossible ways, as if they were being possessed by something. Their voices turned into piercing screams, and the air was filled with the smell of sulfur and burning flesh. Soon, those women were embraced by the fire, but they were not consumed. They disappeared into it. That creature of flames extended a burning appendage toward me, and in that instant I knew I was going to burn to death. But before it could touch me, everything went black. The pain disappeared. I could breathe. And I just stayed there, in silence. I woke up in my truck, sweating and shivering. The sun was already high and the road was empty. For a moment I thought it had all been a nightmare, but then I noticed the smell of burning and something else. I looked toward the passenger seat, and there was a black cloth covering something that shouldn't be there. With trembling hands, I lifted it. Underneath that damn cloth was a human head, the head of a woman. Maybe the same one I had found, but in front of me, there were no remains of anything. Just a dark stain on the pavement. The most horrendous thing about this macabre discovery was the eyes and mouth, sewn shut with black thread. And there was a sheet of paper nailed to her forehead, with a phrase written in shaky handwriting and bad spelling. "Follow your path. The witches are watching you." All I could do was throw my head out the window and set off, accelerating full throttle. But I knew I couldn't get away. After delivering the late load, there were times when I just couldn't function anymore. I couldn't be okay. The following days were a nightmare. I tried to resume my normal life, to convince myself that everything had been a hallucination, a product of tiredness and stress. But I couldn't. Something was chasing me. At first, they were small things, shadows moving in the rearview mirrors, dark figures appearing where I was sure no one else was. And then there were the murmurs in the night, so low that I could almost believe they were imaginary. But they would wake me up with my heart racing. And that smell, God, that burning smell, lingering everywhere, clinging to me even when there was nothing that could explain it. That was how my days were. Unbearable. Torture. Until one afternoon, I stopped in a small town near Takana. It was a dusty place with adobe houses and empty streets. I needed to rest, to eat something that wasn't canned food, to feel human again, to forget about everything for a few moments. I parked the truck near a plaza and walked toward a taco stand that smelled of roast beef and onions. I ate hungrily. That's when an old man approached me. At first, I thought about running. I didn't want anyone to bother me. I assumed he was a beggar asking for alms or something like that. I didn't care. I just wanted to forget everything. When I turned around, ready to insult him, he wasn't there. He was on the other side of me. I hadn't seen him move or arrive. He was just there, suddenly, as if he had emerged from nowhere. His presence unsettled me. He was a thin man of short stature, with brown skin and deep, wise eyes that made me uncomfortable. He wasn't a beggar. He was something else. He stared at me as if he could see something in me that I couldn't. And then, in a soft voice, as if he wanted no one else to hear, he said, "You have disturbed the witches, boy." I froze. I didn't know what to say or how to react. The old man stepped closer. His breath smelled of herbs and tobacco. "They won't rest until they have you. You have that mark on your neck. You're cursed." Instinctively, I brought my hand to my neck. I hadn't noticed anything before, but now, under my fingers, I felt a bump. A rough scar. Panicked, I ran toward the truck. Looking in the rearview mirror, I yanked off my shirt and leaned against the step, inspecting myself. And there it was, a red mark, like a burn. The shape of a symbol I didn't recognize. It was small but clear, as if someone had seared it into my skin with a red-hot iron. "It can't be," I mumbled, touching the mark with my fingers. It didn't hurt, but it felt strangely warm, like it was alive. The old man stood behind me, watching. "That mark is a witch's mark," he said. "Somehow you've disturbed these women. There are many around here, and when they mark you, you can't escape. Oh, son, who knows what evil you saw, what things you witnessed. But you should leave this place. There's nothing good for you here. Heed my warning. If you keep traveling these roads, one day you'll meet them. I don't know why they let you live, why they allowed you to reach this point, because I'm certain you saw something you shouldn't have. But if you don't run now, if you don't leave, one day you'll wake up dead, or your truck will go over a cliff." After saying this, the old man simply turned around and limped away, leaning on his cane. I tried to ignore him. I thanked him, but he didn't respond. I told myself everything would be okay, that I had nothing to worry about. But deep down, I knew he was right. That night, while sleeping in the truck's cab, I had a vision. I was in the clearing again. That damned clearing. Surrounded by those indigenous women. Their faces were covered, but I could feel their black eyes fixed on me. One of them came closer. She had bare feet, yet they made no noise as she stepped onto the earth. She seemed to glide above it. She carried something in her hands, something small and shiny. Then she extended her hand and whispered, "You are part of the offering now." Her voice was twisted, unnatural, like it came from another world. I tried to move, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, just like that night in the clearing. The women closed in, forming a circle around me. The air thickened, grew colder. And then I felt it. Something moving inside me. Inside my guts, inside my chest. I couldn't say what it was, but when I looked at their mud-covered faces, watching them murmur in an ancient tongue as if trying to extract something from me, I shuddered, and then the flesh tore open. My guts spilled out, and from inside me a face emerged, a child's face, screaming, as the infernal heat of the flames consumed both of us. I woke up screaming, drenched in cold sweat. The truck was dark, silent, but that burnt smell still clung to the air. I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't keep driving those damned roads. The next day, I abandoned the truck. I left it parked somewhere and took a bus to Puebla, the only place I knew, where I had grown up, where my family was, the family I had abandoned. I wanted to see my son again, but I couldn't find them anymore, as if they had vanished. Alone, broke, and desperate, I took a job at a convenience store. A simple, uncomplicated job. Far from the roads, far from the mountains. I tried to convince myself I was safe, that I could finally sleep again. But the nightmares didn't stop. Every night, the witches returned. Sometimes they were in the clearing, other times in my room, speaking in a dialect I didn't understand, yet I felt the words deep within me. That burnt smell, it was still there, fainter but ever present, and the mark on my neck never faded. Sometimes, in the mirror, I swore I saw it glow, as if it were alive, and I knew I could never escape them. I bore their mark. To this day, I must admit, with caution, with shame, I live in fear. I know that one day they will find me. I have lived a solitary life, far from the roads and the mountains, yet even now I hear them calling me. Sometimes I dream of walking a long, empty road at night, watching the endless line of asphalt and signs directing me toward my final destination, toward hell. I leave my testimony here. Believe what you want to believe.